Yuki Tanaka was the only person on Clint Eastwood's film set who knew the script was wrong. Culturally, authentically, fundamentally wrong. The Japanese dialogue in Letters from Iwo Jima had been written by American screenwriters, translated by consultants who understood language but not soul. Every line was technically correct Japanese but spiritually false. No soldier in 1945 would speak that way. Yuki was 28, a professional translator hired to help Clint understand what the Japanese actors were saying. For 2 weeks, she'd been giving him accurate translations of inaccurate dialogue, lying by omission. Because how do you tell Clint Eastwood, four-time Oscar winner, legendary director, the man who hired you, that his $20 million script is wrong? Then came the scene that Yuki couldn't translate honestly anymore, a dying soldier's final words to his family. In the script, formal, distant, cold. In reality, a Japanese man facing death would speak from his heart, break tradition, show vulnerability. She had a choice: keep lying and watch a great director make an inauthentic film, or risk everything by telling him the truth. What happened when she finally found her voice changed not just the film, but the entire trajectory of her life and Hollywood's approach to cultural authenticity. It was March 2006, and Yuki Tanaka was sitting in her small apartment in Burbank, staring at a script that was both an opportunity and a problem she didn't know how to solve. The script was for Letters from Iwo Jima, Clint Eastwood's companion film to Flags of Our Fathers. Unlike most Hollywood war films, this one would be told entirely from the Japanese perspective, but filmed in Japanese, with Japanese actors presenting the Battle of Iwo Jima through the eyes of the soldiers defending the island. It was ambitious, unprecedented, a Hollywood legend directing a Japanese language film about Japanese soldiers, treating them not as faceless enemies, but as complex human beings with families, fears, and honor. Yuki had been hired as the on-set translator. Her job was to help Clint understand what the Japanese actors were saying during takes, translate any questions or direction, and ensure clear communication between the English-speaking director and his Japanese cast. It was the biggest opportunity of her 28 years. She'd grown up in Los Angeles, daughter of Japanese immigrants, fluent in both languages, working as a freelance translator for small productions and corporate events. This was a $20 million Clint Eastwood film. This was career-defining. But as she read through the Japanese dialogue, something felt wrong. The words were correct. The grammar was proper. Any Japanese speaker would understand what was being said. But the way the characters spoke, the formality, the emotional distance, the specific phrases used, didn't match how Japanese soldiers in 1945 would have actually communicated. The script had been written in English by American screenwriters Iris Yamashita and Paul Haggis, then translated to Japanese by consultants who knew the language technically but perhaps not culturally. They'd translated words, not souls. Yuki recognized the problem immediately. Japanese is a language where context, relationship, and emotional state dramatically affect how things are said. A soldier speaking to his commander uses different grammar than speaking to a friend. A man facing certain death speaks differently than one expressing routine military protocol. Honor, shame, duty, these concepts changed everything about how Japanese was spoken in that era. The script felt like a textbook, proper but lifeless, accurate but false. Yuki told herself it wasn't her place to say anything. She was hired to translate, not critique. This was Clint Eastwood. He'd won 4 Academy Awards. He'd directed masterpieces. Who was she to tell him his script was wrong? Production began in early March in Los Angeles, recreating the caves and bunkers of Iwo Jima. The cast was primarily Japanese actors, many flown in from Japan specifically for this production. They were professional, dedicated, honored to be working with Clint Eastwood. Yuki noticed that some of the Japanese actors seemed uncomfortable with the dialogue. They would deliver lines as written, but there was a hesitation, a subtle wrongness in their performances. They were saying the words, but not inhabiting them. On the third day of shooting, during a break, Yuki overheard two of the lead actors speaking quietly in Japanese. "Does this feel wrong to you?" one asked. "The dialogue is so formal," the other replied. "No soldier would speak this way to his friend, but it's what's written." "Should we say something?" A pause. "To Clint Eastwood? No. We do what we're hired to do." They walked away. Yuki stood frozen, realizing she wasn't the only one who'd noticed. But if even the lead actors weren't speaking up, how could she? Her role began simply enough. During takes, Clint would watch the performances, then turn to Yuki. What did he say in that line? She would translate, giving him the English meaning of the Japanese words the actor had spoken. But she was translating technically, not authentically. She was telling Clint what the words meant, not whether they were the right words for that moment, that character, that culture. She was lying by omission, and she hated it. The first week passed, the second week began. Clint was directing with his characteristic efficiency and quiet authority. The production was running smoothly. The performances were technically good, but Yuki could feel the inauthenticity in every scene. These were supposed to be real Japanese soldiers, real human beings facing death with honor and fear and humanity. Instead, they sounded like actors reading translated dialogue. Then came the scene that changed everything. It was day 12 of production. The scene featured General Kuribayashi, played by Ken Watanabe, writing a final letter to his wife and children before the inevitable American invasion. In the script, the letter was formal, emotionally distant, focused on duty and honor. Yuki read the Japanese dialogue the night before filming. The words were correct, but a Japanese general in 1945 facing certain death, writing what he knew would be his final words to his family. This is not how he would write. Japanese culture in that era emphasized stoicism and formality, yes. But in private moments, especially final moments, Japanese men would break from that formality. They would express love, regret, vulnerability. The script had the general writing like he was filing a military report, not saying goodbye to the people he loved. Yuki barely slept that night, wrestling with the decision. She could say nothing, translate faithfully, let the scene be filmed as written, or she could risk everything by telling Clint the truth. The next morning, they filmed the scene. Ken Watanabe delivered the dialogue as written. His performance technically perfect but emotionally hollow because the words themselves were wrong. "Cut," Clint said. He looked at the playback, then turned to Yuki. "What is he saying in this section?" Yuki translated word for word. He is telling his wife that his duty to the emperor is his highest priority, and that she should raise their children to honor that duty. Clint nodded, considering. "How's Ken's performance?" This was the moment. Yuki could say good and move on, or she could tell the truth. She took a breath. "Mr. Eastwood, may I speak honestly about something?" Clint looked at her, those famous narrowed eyes focusing completely. "Of course. The performance is technically correct. Ken is delivering the lines as written. But," she hesitated. "But what?" "The dialogue is wrong," Yuki said, her voice quieter than she intended. "Not grammatically. The Japanese is correct, but culturally, spiritually, a Japanese general writing his final words to his family would not speak this way." The entire set had gone quiet. Everyone watching this young translator tell Clint Eastwood his script was wrong. Clint's face revealed nothing. "Explain," Yuki's hands were shaking slightly. In Japanese culture, yes, we value formality and emotional restraint, but in private moments, especially final moments before death, men would break from that. They would express love, show vulnerability. This letter reads like a military report. A real Japanese man facing death would tell his wife he loves her, would tell his children specific things he wants them to remember, would show his humanity even while honoring his duty. Clint was silent for a long moment. The producer looked nervous. The screenwriter, Iris Yamashita, who was on set that day, looked concerned. "You've known this was wrong," Clint finally said. It wasn't a question. Yuki felt her face flush. "Yes, since I read the script." "How long have we been filming?" 12 days. "And you're telling me this now?" Yuki wanted to disappear. "I'm sorry, I should have said something sooner. I was afraid. This is your film, your script, and I'm just—" "You're the cultural expert," Clint interrupted, his voice still that characteristic quiet rasp but carrying complete authority. "That's why we hired you, not just to translate words but to tell us when we're getting things wrong." He turned to the producer and Iris. "How much of the dialogue has this problem?" Iris looked at Yuki. "How much?" Yuki swallowed. "Most of it. The Japanese is technically correct, but the way the characters speak, the formality level, the emotional expression, the specific phrases, it doesn't match how Japanese people, especially soldiers in that era, would actually communicate." The producer's face went pale. "We filmed 12 days of wrong dialogue?" "Technically correct dialogue," Yuki clarified, "but culturally inauthentic." Clint was quiet, thinking. Everyone waited. A director could fire her right now for keeping this information from him for nearly 2 weeks. Or worse, ignore her and continue filming a script that she'd just publicly called wrong. "Yuki," Clint finally said, "I need you to go through the entire script, every scene. Mark every place where the dialogue is technically correct but culturally wrong. Then I need you to work with Iris to rewrite it, not translate American dialogue to Japanese, but write what Japanese characters would actually say in these situations." Yuki's heart was pounding. "You want to rewrite the script?" "I want to make it authentic," Clint said simply. "We're telling a Japanese story about Japanese soldiers. If the dialogue is false, the whole film is false. We'll suspend filming for the scenes that need rewritten dialogue, however long it takes to get it right." The producer started to object. "Clint, we're already on a tight schedule." "This is more important than schedule," Clint said, his tone final. "If we're doing this film, we're doing it right." He looked back at Yuki. 2 weeks. That's what you've carried this for. I appreciate you finally telling me, but next time, day 1. If something's wrong, I need to know immediately, understood?" "Yes, sir," Yuki said, relief and terror mixing together. That evening, Yuki and Iris Yamashita sat down with the script. Iris was gracious, understanding immediately what Yuki meant. "I wrote this in English," Iris said, "thinking about the emotional beats, but I'm Japanese-American, 4th generation. I don't speak Japanese fluently. I relied on consultants for the translation, and they gave me technically correct Japanese. But not emotionally correct," Yuki added gently. "Show me," Iris said. "Teach me." They worked for 3 weeks, going through every scene. Yuki didn't just translate. She explained context. How Japanese soldiers in 1945 would build camaraderie. How they would express fear without showing weakness. How they would speak of death and honor. How formality would break in private moments. How love and duty intertwined in Japanese psychology of that era. They rewrote dialogue to match not just language, but soul. A scene where soldiers discussed their families became less formal, more intimate. A commander's speech to his men kept its authority but gained humanity. Letters Home became emotionally vulnerable while still honoring cultural context. Ken Watanabe, when he saw the rewritten letter scene, read it and had tears in his eyes. "This is right," he said in Japanese. "This is how my grandfather would have written." Other Japanese actors had similar reactions. The dialogue now fit not just linguistically but spiritually. They could inhabit these characters authentically. When filming resumed with the rewritten scenes, the difference was visible immediately. Performances deepened. The actors weren't just saying lines, they were living them. The film gained an authenticity that transcended translation. Clint watched the playback of the rewritten letter scene. Ken's performance was completely different. Vulnerable, human, heartbreaking, while still honoring the character's dignity and duty. "That's it," Clint said quietly. "That's what we needed." He looked at Yuki. "Thank you for finding your voice, even if it took 2 weeks." Letters from Iwo Jima was released in December 2006 to widespread critical acclaim. Critics praised its authenticity, its cultural accuracy, its deep understanding of Japanese military psychology and honor. The film was nominated for 4 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director. It didn't win Best Picture, but it won something more important: the respect of Japanese audiences and critics who recognized that this Hollywood film had treated their history and culture with genuine authenticity. Japanese film critics wrote specifically about the dialogue, noting how unusual it was for a Hollywood production to capture the nuances of Japanese military speech patterns and emotional expression from that era. Yuki's contribution was known in the industry, but not publicly. She didn't seek credit. But Clint made sure people knew. In interviews, he mentioned the young translator who'd had the courage to tell him his script was wrong, and how that honesty had saved the film. The story spread through Hollywood. Yuki began receiving calls from other productions working with Japanese elements. Her reputation grew as someone who didn't just translate words, but ensured cultural authenticity. By 2010, Yuki had established herself as Hollywood's go-to cultural consultant for Japanese productions. She worked on films, TV shows, even video games, ensuring that Japanese characters, dialogue, and culture were represented authentically. In 2015, she was hired as the cultural consultant for a major studio's Japanese set film. The director, a young filmmaker who'd grown up watching Letters from Iwo Jima, told her, "I hired you because I heard the story about how you told Clint Eastwood his script was wrong. I need someone with that kind of courage and integrity." Yuki smiled, remembering those terrifying 2 weeks when she'd known the truth but been too afraid to speak. "It took me 12 days to find that courage. I don't recommend waiting that long." In 2020, during a retrospective on Letters from Iwo Jima, Clint was asked about the film's authenticity and cultural accuracy. "We had the best translator in the business," Clint said, "Yuki Tanaka. She had the courage to tell me when we were getting it wrong, even when it was scary for her to speak up. That's the kind of person you want on your team. Someone who cares more about truth than about keeping you comfortable." The interviewer asked if he'd been upset when she told him the script needed rewriting. Clint's response was characteristically direct. "I was upset that she waited 2 weeks to tell me, but I understood why. I'm Clint Eastwood. I directed 20-some films, won Oscars. She was 28, first major production. Of course she was scared, but here's the thing. I don't want people who are too scared to tell me the truth. I want people who will risk being uncomfortable to make sure we get it right." He paused, then added, "Yuki taught me something important. Cultural authenticity isn't just about hiring the right actors or filming in the right locations. It's about having people on your team who understand the culture deeply enough to know when something's wrong and brave enough to say it out loud. That's how you make something real." Today, Yuki Tanaka is one of the most respected cultural consultants in Hollywood. She's worked on dozens of major productions ensuring that Japanese culture, language, and perspective are represented authentically. She's trained other consultants, teaching them not just language but the importance of speaking up when authenticity is compromised. She keeps a framed photo in her office, the cast and crew of Letters from Iwo Jima on the last day of filming. Clint is in the center, and if you look closely, you can see Yuki in the back, small but present. The young translator who found her voice and changed not just one film but Hollywood's entire approach to cultural authenticity. The lesson she teaches young consultants is simple. You're not hired to make powerful people comfortable. You're hired to make sure the story is true, and sometimes truth requires courage. Sometimes it requires telling someone important that they're wrong. That's not disrespect. That's the job. If this story of courage, authenticity, and finding your voice moved you, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to remember that truth matters more than comfort, and the youngest voice in the room sometimes carries the most important message. Have you ever had to tell someone in power they were wrong? Share your story in the comments.